The click of the bolt cutters was offensively loud in the Sunday morning quiet. The heavy chain, coated in a fine layer of rust and grit from years of neglect, fell apart with a metallic sigh. Arthur Vance, his knuckles white and papery, let the severed links drop onto the concrete, the sound echoing flatly in the cavernous hallway. He stared at the brass lock in his hand, CYLOK, number 14B, as if it were the source of all his pain. It was just a lock, a cheap piece of metal. But it was the last lock, the last thing their son Michael had put his hands on, the last thing he had closed. Arthur took a deep, rattling breath and slid the corrugated metal door upward. It screamed in protest, a long, rusty shriek that grated on his nerves. The noise echoed down the empty, flickering corridor of U-Store-It, a place that smelled of damp concrete and forgotten things. A rush of cold, stale air rolled out to meet them, carrying the scent of dust, old mildew, and a faint, sweet, sour odor that made Eleanor's stomach clench. It was the smell of decay. "Oh, Art," she whispered, pulling her thin gray cardigan tighter. She clutched the strap of her purse, her knuckles matching his. "I don't know if I can do this." "We have to, Elle," Arthur said. His voice was gravel. He was a retired systems engineer, a man who believed in order, in process. This was the last terrible step in a process he couldn't understand. She said noon. After that, it's gone. The 10 by 20 unit was packed to the ceiling. It was an assault. Not the neat, labeled boxes of a life in transition, but the chaotic, spilling detritus of a life derailed. Stacks of vinyl records, their covers warped and water-stained. A deflated basketball, grime-caked, from a life he hadn't lived in 20 years. 3 mismatched dining chairs, one with a broken leg. And everywhere, towers of black garbage bags, sagging with the weight of unseen, unwanted things, some leaking a dark, unidentifiable fluid onto the floor. This was the auction block. This was the final, humiliating summary of their son's 42 years. The storage unit they hadn't known he kept, paid for by a credit card they didn't know he had, now delinquent for 3 months. The manager, a woman with tired eyes and a clipboard, had given them until noon. After that, it's out of my hands. The auction is at 1. Let's just start, Elle," Arthur said again, more to himself than to her. He and Eleanor, married 53 years, moved with the slow, pained stiffness of fresh grief, a grief that had hollowed them out in the last month. They were here to find anything of value, anything to salvage, before the rest was sold for parts to strangers who would pick over their son's life for pennies. They were looking for a ghost in a pile of junk. They were afraid of what they might find. Eleanor, her hands trembling, sorted through a cardboard box of kitchen supplies. Chipped mugs from gas stations, a single smeared wine glass, a rusty can opener, a solidified bottle of ketchup. "This wasn't Michael," she whispered, holding up a mug with a crude joke on it. "I don't know this. I don't know any of this." Their Michael, the boy who built model rockets on the front lawn, the young man who quoted poetry at dinner, the regional sales manager in the crisp shirt who lied, who disappeared, who died alone in a motel room in a city they'd never heard of, a coronary event at 42, who left this insult. Arthur was at the back of the unit, wrestling with a large, battered object half hidden under a pile of stiff, greasy tarps. "I remember this," he grunted, his voice strained. He pulled it free, and a cloud of dust motes danced in the single bare bulb overhead. Eleanor turned, and her breath caught in her throat. Her hand flew to her mouth. It was the old steamer trunk, cedar and brass, scarred and battered from a dozen college moves. It was the trunk that had sat at the foot of Michael's bed in their house, the one they'd bought him at an antique store when he left for Ann Arbor, the one that had been in his room filled with his childhood treasures until he'd moved out for good. His room, Eleanor whispered. It was the first thing she recognized, the first thing that felt like him. She ran a hand over the dusty lid, tracing the deep scratch he'd put in it trying to pry it open with a screwdriver when he was 19. It wasn't locked. She lifted the heavy top. The hinges creaked and the scent of their attic rolled out. Cedar and time. It was a time capsule. On top lay his varsity letter, the felt M curling at the edges. A few yearbooks. A framed photo of a dog they'd never met, a happy-looking golden retriever. It was a shallow layer of nostalgia, the things he'd saved before his life turned. "That's it, then," Arthur said, his voice hollow. He nudged the trunk with the toe of his boot. "The one good thing. The rest is garbage. Let's just lock it and go, Elle. Let them have it. I can't touch this." He couldn't bear to sift through this testament to his son's failure. This trunk was from a time before the lies, before the money vanished, before the awful clinical phone call. "No." Eleanor's voice was quiet, but the steel in it made Arthur pause. He'd heard that tone. It was the tone she used when one of them was in the hospital, the tone that meant she would not be moved. Wait. She was looking inside the trunk, her brow furrowed. She ran her fingers along the cedar bottom, pushing aside the old photo. "Arthur, this is wrong." "What's wrong? It's empty, Elle. Like everything else. A false promise." "No, the bottom. It's too high." She knocked on the wood panel. It made a hollow, resonant thunk, a sound that was different from the solid thud of the sides. "This isn't the bottom. Look, here." She pointed to the edge, where the wood panel didn't quite meet the side, hidden by a slight shadow. She dug her fingernails in, the nails she always kept so neat, and pulled. The panel resisted, stuck with time and damp. "Here, let me," Arthur grumbled. He slid his pocket knife from his trousers and worked the blade into the seam. He levered it. The panel resisted, then lifted with a small sucking sound. It was a false bottom. Beneath it was a space perhaps 6 inches deep, but it ran the full length and width of the trunk. It was a meticulously crafted hidden compartment, a secret space, a tunnel, dark and narrow, beneath the floor of his room. And it wasn't empty. Arthur and Eleanor stared. This was not the drug paraphernalia they had been dreading. This was not the needles or the pipes, the sad expected end. The space was lined with dark blue velvet, and inside, nestled in neat, custom-cut compartments, was a life they could not comprehend. There was a stack of cash, neatly bound hundreds, more money than Arthur had seen in one place since his retirement party from the plant. He'd worked 40 years for a pension. This looked like a quarter of it, sitting in a box. Beside it, a satellite phone, heavy and black. Next to that, a worn leather ledger, its pages filled with neat, coded entries, dates, strings of numbers, and single names: Anya, Leo, Marisol, the twins. And in the last compartment, tucked into a fold of velvet, was a small, almost flat, hand-sewn pouch. It was made from a fabric Eleanor recognized, her heart stopping. It was the blue flannel with yellow ducks from the pajamas she'd made him when he was 5. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely grasp it. She lifted it. It was soft, worn. She opened the simple drawstring, and a cascade of small, milk-white objects fell into her trembling palm. Arthur leaned closer, his glasses slipping down his nose. "My God," he breathed, his voice a dry rasp. They weren't jewels. They weren't casino chips. They were baby teeth. Dozens of them. "Wait, before you see what's inside." If this story already has your heart pounding, tell us where you're watching from. When forgotten boxes open, when second chances hide under dust and debt, subscribe and stay close. You'll never guess what's been left behind. Now, back to the lock clicking open. Arthur stumbled back, knocking over a stack of records. The vinyl discs clattered across the concrete, a discordant scratching noise, but neither of them heard. He leaned against the cold metal wall, his hand over his mouth, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. What was he? What was this? The implications were monstrous. The cash, the burner phone, the names, the teeth. It was the inventory of a nightmare, a trafficker, a monster, a predator. The sweet, sour smell in the unit suddenly seemed vile, the unmistakable smell of human decay. "No," Eleanor said. Her voice was a cracked whisper, but it was defiant. She knelt, her old knees screaming, fumbling for the teeth she dropped on the dusty concrete. "No, not Michael, not our Michael." "Then what?" Arthur shouted, his voice breaking. He gestured wildly at the unit, at the garbage bags, at the hidden evil compartment. "We didn't know him, Eleanor. We've been saying it for a month. We didn't know him. We thought he was sick. We thought he was an addict, a gambler. This is evil. We have to call the police. We have to call them now." "And say what?" Eleanor shot back, her grief turning to a sharp, protective fury she hadn't felt since Michael was bullied on the playground. She scooped the last of the teeth back into the pouch, her hands shaking so badly. That our son, our dead son, was this? What if it's not what it looks like, Art? What if we're wrong? They'll blacken his name. It's all we have left. "How can this be wrong?" He pointed a trembling finger at the ledger. "Anya, Leo, Marisol. These are lists. This is a business. This is why he was always broke, why he needed money, why he never came home. This is where it all went, not drugs, something worse." The word hung in the stale, cold air. Worse. They had grieved for a son lost to addiction, a tragic, common enough sorrow. They had mourned a weakness, a disease. This was a depravity. It voided every memory, tainted every Christmas, every birthday card, every "I love you, Mom." It made their entire life a lie. Eleanor stood up, clutching the small flannel pouch to her chest as if it were a wounded bird. She looked at the ledger, then at the cash. Her eyes were scanning the compartment, desperate for anything else, anything to contradict the nightmare. And she saw something Arthur didn't. Tucked beside the ledger, half hidden by a fold of velvet, was a small, worn object. A laminated card. She picked it up. It was a prayer card, the kind they give out at funeral homes. On the front was a picture of St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers. On the back, in Michael's familiar, looping handwriting, the same handwriting from his college applications, was a short list. It wasn't numbers. It was addresses. 3 of them. One in Detroit, one in Windsor, Canada, one just 20 miles away at an address she didn't recognize, listed simply as the station. And beneath the addresses, one line, a quote maybe. "I am the tunnel. I am the door." The satellite phone in the trunk suddenly buzzed. It was a harsh, shocking sound in the dead quiet of the storage unit. Arthur and Eleanor both flinched as if struck. It buzzed again, a desperate, insistent vibration against the velvet lining, loud as a swarm of angry wasps. Arthur stared at it, horrified. Don't touch it, Elle. It's evidence. They're looking for him." Eleanor looked at the prayer card in her hand. "I am the tunnel." She looked at the phone. Her son was dead. He died alone, a John Doe in a city far from home, until his ID finally surfaced 2 days later. He had died, and this phone was still alive. This was a piece of him, still moving, still acting, in a world he'd left. She reached into the compartment, her hand brushing past the cold, illicit cash, and picked up the phone. It felt heavy, dangerous. She pressed the green button. "Hello?" Her voice was small, the voice of a very old woman, lost and afraid. For a moment, only static. Then a voice, young and terrified. A girl, speaking in rapid, accented English, a panic that transcended language. "Michael, Michael, por favor, it is time. He is coming back. The truck is here. He says he will check the room. You said to call. You said, Michael, por favor, ayúdame." The voice broke into a desperate, raw sob. The line clicked and went dead. Eleanor stood frozen, the phone heavy in her hand, the ghost of the girl's terror in her ear. The prayer card fell from her other hand, fluttering to the floor. Arthur had gone pale, a grayish, sick color, his hand gripping the edge of a metal shelving unit to stay upright. "Who was that?" he whispered. "What did she want?" "She was scared," Eleanor said, her mind racing, trying to piece together the terror in that voice with the awful evidence in the trunk. "He is coming back. He will check the room." She was asking for Michael. She needed help. "Help with what?" Arthur said, his denial cracking. This is a criminal ring. He was part of it. And now they're calling. They're looking for him. She's one of them. Or one of his victims. She called him for help, Arthur. Eleanor's mind snagged on the last word. Ayúdame. Help me. She looked down at the trunk, at the secret compartment, at the tunnel beneath his room, and a new, terrible, and fragile idea began to form. An idea that was almost worse than the first one because it was so much heavier. What if the ledger wasn't a list of sales? What if it was a list of rescues? Anya, Leo, Marisol, the twins. I am the tunnel. I am the door. And the pouch, the baby teeth, trophies of a monster, or keepsakes, proof of life, mementos, from the children he couldn't save, or the ones he did. "We have to go to that address," Eleanor said, bending to pick up the prayer card. "The station." "Go?" Arthur was incredulous, his voice rising to a near shout. "Eleanor, we are going to the police. This is the end of it. We are 73 years old. Our son is dead. Whatever this is, it is over. We handed to them. The trunk, the phone, the teeth, all of it." He stopped, his eyes landing on something else in the compartment. The key. Wait. He had spotted something she hadn't. Tucked next to the sat phone was a small tin box. Not a key fob. Black, nondescript. And a small laminated card attached to it with a zip tie. Climate-Store, Unit 218, 488 River Road. It was another storage unit. The drive to River Road was silent, but it was a loud, agonizing silence. Arthur drove their old, immaculate Buick 10 miles under the speed limit, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He was at war with himself. Every rational instinct, every fiber of his being as an engineer and a law-abiding citizen, screamed at him to turn around, to drive to the police precinct. But Eleanor sat beside him, the tin box and the leather-bound ledger in her lap. She hadn't said a word. She just held the prayer card and stared out the window. She had put the pouch of teeth in her coat pocket. He could see the small bulge over her heart. They hadn't called the police. Arthur had wanted to, had picked up his own phone, but Eleanor had stopped him, her hand on his arm. What if she's still waiting, Art? That girl. What if she's waiting for Michael, and the police are the ones he was hiding from? What if they're the ones who will check the room? It was that thought that finally broke him. The idea that their son was not the villain, but the only thing standing against the villain. It was a terrifying, fragile hope, a hope that felt more dangerous than the grief. Climate Store was nothing like the U-Store. It was a new facility, clean and bright, with heated concrete floors and keypad entry. It looked like a suburban office park, sterile and anonymous. It was the kind of place you'd store financial records, not a life's wreckage. Arthur, his hand shaking, punched in the code from the back of the laminated card. A gate slid open with a soft, expensive whir. Unit 218 was indoors, down a long, brightly lit hallway that smelled of fresh paint and disinfectant. The key fob beeped and the lock on the unit clicked open electronically. Arthur pulled up the door. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. This unit was not a tomb of forgotten things. It was a room. It was small, maybe 10 by 10, but it was clean, organized. A cot was made up in the corner with a clean sleeping bag and a pillow. A small folding table held a powerful laptop humming softly. On the wall, a massive corkboard was covered in a spider web of maps, photos, and handwritten notes, all connected by strands of red and black yarn. It was a pre-digital analog investigation. Photos of truck stops, shipping container yards, rural motels. Photos of men, grainy and taken from a distance, their faces circled in red. And photos of children and young women smiling in what looked like school pictures, each with a name written underneath. Anya, Leo, Marisol. They were the same names from the ledger. They weren't clients. They were missing persons. Arthur, the engineer, walked slowly toward the map. His mind, which had been fogged with grief, was suddenly sharp. This is the port of Detroit. And this is the truck route from Toledo. He traced a line of red yarn with a trembling finger. These are shipping lanes. These are truck manifests. He was tracking them. He was tracking cargo. He recognized a logistics map when he saw one, but this wasn't tracking auto parts. Eleanor sat down at the small table, her legs suddenly weak. She opened the laptop. It wasn't password protected. The desktop was clean, save for one folder. It was labeled The Tunnel. She clicked it open. It was a database. Decades of work. Scanned news clippings of missing persons cases the police had abandoned. Notes from private investigators marked paid. Scrambled financial records showing movements of money through dozens of shell accounts. Audio files, and a journal. She opened the journal. It was a simple text file. She scrolled past dozens of entries, each a small, painful piece of his secret life. March 14. Missed mom's birthday again. Sent flowers. The lie gets heavier. But I got the twins across at Windsor. They're with the family in Toronto. Sent the all clear. The V group is sloppy. They're using the same driver. I can get him. April 2. Lost one. A boy, maybe 12. The van was too fast. I was too late. Drove all night for nothing. Couldn't sleep. I see his face. Eleanor was choking back sobs, her hand over her mouth. She clicked on the most recent entry, dated 2 days before Michael's death. Got the call. The cargo is a woman and her daughter, maybe 8 years old, from Moldova. They're being held at the Red Barn Motel off I-75 by a driver for the V Group. He keeps them in the room while he runs local. The girl is sick. He's getting spooked. He's moving them north tomorrow. Price is $10K. I said yes. He thinks I'm a buyer. He'll make the drop at the old pedestrian bridge, then to the station, then home. Anya's tooth came in. She's safe in Toronto. Told her mom. God, I'm tired, but I'm close. I'm so close to the big one, the one who moves the parts, the one they call the surgeon. Eleanor read it twice, her vision swimming. Anya's tooth came in. She reached into her pocket and her fingers closed around the small, hard, familiar shapes. Not trophies. They were gifts. They were promises. He wasn't an addict, Art, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. He wasn't sick. He was saving them. Arthur was reading over her shoulder, his face ashen. All the years of missed calls, the loans he never paid back, the secrecy, the paranoia, the weight loss, it wasn't addiction. It was a war, a one-man war fought from a 10 by 10 storage unit. The money in the trunk, Arthur said, his voice thick with a profound, crushing shame. It wasn't for him. It was ransom, bribes. He was buying them, buying their lives. He was the tunnel, Arthur, Eleanor wept, clutching the prayer card. He was the door. The sat phone, which Eleanor had brought with her in her purse, buzzed again. It was on the table, vibrating against the wood, the sound violent in the small, quiet room. This time, Arthur answered it. His hand was shaking, but he picked it up. Hello? A different voice. Male, calm, and cold as the concrete floor. Michael, you're late. The package is at the bridge. I'm there. My patience is thin. You have the product? Arthur's mind went blank. He looked at Eleanor, his eyes wide with panic. She pointed frantically at the laptop, at the journal entry. Price is $10K. Yes, Arthur said, trying to steady his voice, trying to sound like a businessman. A criminal? The product. I have it. Good. Bridge. 10 minutes. Don't be clever, Michael. I have eyes on you. And bring the girls medicine. She's making noise. It's bad for business. The line went dead. A new text message appeared on the phone's screen. A single photo. It was the girl from the first phone call, holding a small, terrified child. The girl in the photo was holding up a copy of today's newspaper, the date clearly visible. They were alive. They were waiting. He thinks you're Michael, Eleanor breathed. He wants to make the trade. What trade? Arthur said, panicked. He wants $10,000. He wants medicine. What medicine? Eleanor was already searching the room. On a small metal shelf, there was a first aid kit, and next to it, a small plug-in cooler. She opened it. Inside were two items, a bag of IV fluids and a small refrigerated vial. The label was in Russian. Next to it was a duffel bag, packed and ready. It contained water, blankets, a burner phone, and a small GPS tracker. And in the laptop bag, tucked in a side pocket, they found it. The $10,000, bundled just as it had been in the journal. He was going to buy them, Arthur, Eleanor said, her voice shaking with a terrible, fierce resolve. He was going to buy those two people, and then he had a heart attack. He died. So what do we do? Arthur said, his hands shaking so badly he had to put them in his pockets. We call the police. We tell them everything, right now. We give them this room. This is what they do. And what happens to them? Eleanor gestured to the phone. That man is at the bridge. He's waiting. If Michael doesn't show up, what does he do to them? That girl who called, she said he was coming to check the room. They're running out of time, Art. Eleanor, this is insane, he pleaded. We're not him. We're old. This is dangerous. These are killers. The V group, the surgeon. I know, she said. She zipped up the duffel bag, putting the small cooler inside. She handed the laptop bag with the money to Arthur. But that's our son's last act on this earth, and it's not finished. She looked her husband of 53 years in the eyes. The grief was still there, a vast black ocean. But now there was something else. A pinpoint of light, a purpose. He died trying to save them, Art. We can't let them die too. We can't let him fail. Not now. Not when he was so close. Arthur looked at the map, at the spiderweb of evil his son had been fighting alone. He looked at the face of his son he'd never known. He had mourned a failure. He had been ashamed of a victim. And he had been wrong. His son was a soldier. He took the bag from her, the weight of the money feeling obscene. The pedestrian bridge, I know the one, over the old rail yard, by the old plant, the plant where he had worked. Then let's go, Eleanor said, picking up the sat phone and putting it in her purse. Let's go finish our son's work. The pedestrian bridge was a rusting skeleton of iron, spanning a desolate, graffiti-covered rail yard. It was a place of total neglect, smelling of diesel and rain. Arthur parked the Buick at the bottom of the concrete ramp, his heart hammering so hard against his ribs he felt dizzy. The sun was setting, casting long, ugly shadows. This is crazy, Elle. He'll see us. He'll know we're not Michael. He'll shoot us. Maybe, Eleanor said. She was surprisingly calm, the calm of absolute, terrifying certainty. Or maybe he's just a delivery man. He just wants the money. He's a businessman. We give him the bag, he gives us them. It's not them, Elle. It's a woman and a child, a sick child. What do we do with them? We take them to the station, she said, pointing to the prayer card she had taped to the dashboard. We do what Michael would have done, one step at a time. A black sedan was parked on the bridge itself, idling, its windows tinted. As they got out of the car, a man stepped out of the sedan. He was large, wearing a dark coat despite the mild evening, and his face was invisible in the twilight. He stood at the center of the bridge, waiting. "Stay in the car, Elle," Arthur whispered, his throat dry. "No," she said, getting out. Her knees ached, but she stood tall. He knows Michael. He doesn't know us. But he's not expecting a 70-year-old woman. It's our only advantage. We walk slowly. They walked up the ramp. Arthur carried the laptop bag with the money. Eleanor carried the duffel with the medicine. Every step on the cracked concrete was a lifetime. The wind whistled through the iron latticework. The man watched them, unmoving. They were 50 feet away. 40. "That's far enough," the man called out. His voice was flat, with a thick Eastern European accent. "Where's Michael?" He couldn't come," Arthur said, his voice cracking. He sounded like an old man. He was an old man. He sent us. We have the product and the medicine. The man was silent. He was looking them over, and they could feel the confused, violent anger radiating off him. He sent you? He sent his grandparents? This is a joke. He put his hand inside his coat. "He's dead!" Eleanor cried out. The words echoed under the bridge, a raw, piercing scream of a mother's grief. "Michael is dead! He died 2 days ago. But he left us this. He left us the money. He left us her." The man froze. His hand was still in his coat, but he didn't move. He stared at Eleanor. He was weighing the situation. The money, the old couple, the dead contact. This was a very messy loose end. He was our son," Eleanor said, tears rolling down her hot cheeks. "We found the phone. We found the money. We just want to finish. Please, we have the 10,000. Just let them go." The man was silent for a full, agonizing minute. Arthur felt his knees begin to buckle. He was sure he was about to die. Finally, the man grunted. "Unreal. The kid had guts, I'll give him that." He turned and yelled back at his car, a sharp command in his own language. "Get out!" The back door of the sedan opened. A young woman, thin and pale, scrambled out, pulling a small child with her. The girl looked no older than 8. She was coughing, a deep, racking, wet cough. It was the girl from the first phone call, Lena. "The medicine," the man said, pointing at the duffel, "and the bag." "The girl first," Eleanor said, her voice shaking but firm. The man sneered. "You're in no position." "The girl first," Eleanor repeated, stepping in front of Arthur. "Or we call the police. We don't care what happens to us. Our son is already dead. But they'll be here in 2 minutes. My hand is on the phone." The man stared at her, then at the sky, as if cursing God. "Fine." He shoved the woman and child forward. Go to Grandma." The woman, Lena, ran, stumbling on broken pavement, dragging her daughter. She collapsed at Eleanor's feet, sobbing in a language they didn't understand, clutching at Eleanor's coat. "Okay," Arthur said, holding out the laptop bag. "Here." "Throw it," the man commanded. Arthur threw the bag. It skidded across the pavement, stopping at the man's feet. He picked it up, opened it, glanced inside at the bundles of cash. He nodded. "Now the medicine." Eleanor took the cooler out of the duffel and slid it across the concrete. The man picked it up. "It was good business, Michael," he called out to the empty air, a strange, cruel eulogy. He was a crazy bastard, but he paid on time. He got in his car. In 30 seconds, the black sedan had disappeared into the urban dusk. Eleanor and Arthur were left on the bridge with the 2 refugees. The woman was still weeping, kissing Eleanor's shoes. The little girl, Maja, was staring at Arthur, her eyes wide with terror. And then she let out another terrible, wet cough, and her small body went limp. "It's okay," Eleanor said, kneeling down, her old joints protesting, pulling the woman up. She put her hand on the woman's shoulder. "It's okay. Seguro, you're safe." She looked at Arthur. His face was a mask of shock, grief, and a profound, dawning awe. He had just faced down a killer and won. "Get the car, Art," she said softly, lifting the child into her arms. "She's burning up. Let's take them to the station." The address on the prayer card wasn't a house. It was a small, unassuming brick church in a fading, tough neighborhood, its steeple dark against the pre-dawn sky. A single light was on in the rectory window, a beacon in the darkness. Arthur pulled the Buick into the small, cracked parking lot. He helped the woman, Lena, out of the car. Maja was breathing shallowly in Eleanor's arms, a faint wheeze. Eleanor knocked on the heavy wooden door of the rectory. After a moment, it opened. A man in a simple black shirt and worn jeans, a priest or pastor, stood there. He was young, maybe 30, but he had the same tired, ancient eyes they'd seen on the storage unit manager. He looked at Eleanor, then at Arthur, then at Lena and Maja. His face flooded with a terrible, sad understanding. "You are not Michael," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," Arthur said, his voice thick. "We're his parents. He's gone. He died 3 days ago." The pastor closed his eyes for a moment, his hand gripping the doorframe. He swayed, just slightly. "I knew it," he whispered. "I had been calling. He never misses a check-in. I feared." He stepped aside and held the door open. "Please, bring them in. She's sick." Inside, it was warm and smelled of coffee and old books. Another woman, older, with a kind, wrinkled face, came from a back room. She immediately took Maja from Eleanor's arms, clucking softly and speaking to Lena in her own language. Lena burst into fresh tears, this time of pure, unadulterated relief, and followed her down a hallway. The pastor led Arthur and Eleanor into a small, cluttered office. "I am Father Ben. Please, sit. I don't know what to say. He was a good man, a brave man." "We didn't know," Arthur said, the confession tearing out of him, the shame from the storage unit returning, but new and sharper. We thought he was a failure, an addict, a gambler. We were ashamed of him. He was the opposite of a failure, Father Ben said gently, pouring them coffee with a shaky hand. He was a miracle. He operated on a level I could barely understand. He found them, the ones no one else was looking for, the ones who fell through the cracks, who were taken. He called his network the Tunnel. We found his journal, Eleanor said, pulling the leather ledger from her purse. And this, she held out the small flannel pouch. Father Ben took it, his eyes widening. He opened it and looked at the small pile of baby teeth. A small, sad smile touched his lips. I told him this was strange, he said. He said he couldn't take photos of them, too dangerous. He said he couldn't use their real names in his files, but he needed proof that they were real, that they were safe. When he got a child to safety, to a new family, he would ask the new mother for the first baby tooth they lost in their new life, a sign of their new beginning. He poured the teeth onto his desk, a small white pile under the lamplight. Anya, Leo, Marisol. This is Anya Petrova's. She's in music school in Toronto. She plays the violin. This is Leo. He's in Montreal. He's a chef. Michael loved his pastries. This one is Marisol. She was 14. He posed as a buyer to get her. He nearly didn't come out of that one. That was the first time he called me, 5 years ago. He was bleeding in a motel room, and he was laughing. He said, "She's on a bus to Windsor, Padre. She's safe." That was your son. Father Ben explained that the Tunnel was a small, secret group, a trucker who would move people, a nurse who provided medical care, a lawyer who filed asylum claims. All in secret, all funded and run by Michael. He was a regional sales manager. He knew logistics. He knew the truck routes. He told me he saw something at a truck stop 10 years ago. A girl in a cage on a flatbed. He called the police. They did nothing, so he did something. He saved them, Arthur murmured, the world tilting on its axis. My son, he saved them. He saved hundreds, Father Ben said, his voice thick. And he never told a soul. He lived in that terrible apartment, drove that broken-down car, so he could use every penny for this, for the Tunnel. You did his last run. You brought Lena and Maja. You don't know what you've done. Their buyer was a trafficker for the surgeon. This group doesn't just sell people. They sell parts. Michael was the only one who could intercept that sale. He was trying to get to the man at the top. He died trying. Eleanor and Arthur sat in the warm office, the sun just beginning to light the stained glass windows, turning the dust motes to gold. They had entered a storage unit that morning to bury a son they were ashamed of. They were leaving a church, having met a man they would never know, a hero who shared his name. They drove home in silence. The sun was fully up now, painting the cold November sky in shades of pink and orange. The world was too bright, too loud, too normal. The Buick hummed along the highway. It was the same car, the same road, the same two old people. But everything was different. The grief was still there, a hole that would never be filled. But the shame was gone. In its place was a fierce, burning, heartbreaking pride. They were exhausted, scoured down to the bone. They didn't speak of what they'd done. They spoke of him. I remember when he was 12, Eleanor said, her voice soft, looking at the passing houses. He found a bird with a broken wing. He built a splint from a popsicle stick. He sat with it for 3 days, feeding it with an eyedropper. He couldn't stand a bully, Arthur said, his hands steady on the wheel. I remember he got in a fight in 9th grade, broke his nose. The other kid was picking on a special needs boy. Michael, he stepped in. We had to pay for the kid's braces." He paused. "We grounded him for a month, for fighting." They were rewriting their own history. They were seeing the man in the boy. When they got back to their quiet, empty house, Arthur didn't go inside. He went to the garage and came back with the bolt cutters. "What are you doing, Art?" Eleanor asked, following him back to the car. "We have to finish," he said, his voice firm. "We have to clean out his room." They drove back to the U-Store. The manager was at the gate, tapping on her foot, her clipboard in hand. "You're cutting it close. Noon is noon." "We'll be out," Arthur said. They rolled up the door to Unit 14B. The light from the hallway cut into the darkness. The chaotic pile of junk was still there. The garbage bags, the broken chairs, the deflated basketball. But it didn't look like junk anymore. It looked like the camouflage of a soldier, the cover for a secret war. This was the rubble he'd hidden behind. They began to work, but they didn't sort into keep and trash. They began to pack, carefully. They were not cleaning, they were curating. They were collecting the relics of a secret life. Eleanor folded his old t-shirts with care, smelling them, trying to find a trace of him. She found a faint scent of cedar and wept, but they were different tears. Arthur gently cleaned the dust off the vinyl records. He saw a title, Bob Dylan, Shelter from the Storm. He had to sit down on one of the broken chairs. Eleanor stood for a long time, holding the cedar trunk open. The hidden compartment, the tunnel, was open. It was just an empty wooden box now. But to her, it was the whole world. It was the secret heart of her son. "He was right under our feet, Art," she whispered, touching the velvet lining. "This whole time, in his room. We never knew how to look." Arthur came and stood beside her. He put his arm around her shoulder. He looked at the empty compartment, and then at the boxes they had packed. "We know now, Elle," he said, his voice quiet. "We know now." He reached down and gently closed the false bottom. He closed the heavy lid of the trunk. The thud was final. They finished packing the last box as the manager walked up, tapping her pen. "Time's up. We're done," Arthur said. He and Eleanor, holding hands, walked out of the unit. Arthur reached up and pulled the metal door down. The clang it made was loud, a period at the end of a long sentence. He handed the manager the CY lock, the one he'd cut off that morning. "You can have it," he said. They walked out of the dark, cold corridor, past the rows and rows of locked doors, past the secrets and the forgotten lives. They stepped out of the building into the bright, cold, blinding light of noon. They paused, blinking, their faces turned up to the sun. The light was almost too much to bear, but they did not look away. And for the first time in a month, they were not the same.